Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Double Portion Inheritance Ministries. I'm Maria Merola Wold.
And I'm Gary Wold.
In accordance with 1 Corinthians 9, 7 through 14, after the Sabbath is over, we ask you to prayerfully consider a one-time or recurring donation to www.paypal.com/PayPalMe/DPI Ministries or www.venmo.com@Maria-Merola. You can also use the email address doubleportioninheritance@gmail.com. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Today is April 20th, 2024. And the name of this teaching today is, What is the Testimony of Messiah? A lot of people have questioned me about, what does this mean in Revelation 19:10 when Yahushua says, it says the testimony of Jesus, this is how Christians read it, the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Well, what exactly does that mean? So this was during a season of intense fasting and prayer in the summer of 2007 that I asked the Father, Abba Yahuwah, what is the testimony of Messiah? Because we are told in a couple other places in Scripture that those who have his testimony, not just know about his testimony. See, it's not enough to just know about his testimony. Those who have the same testimony as him have the testimony of Yahushua. It says that we will have the right to eat of the tree of life. And I'm looking it up right now. Have the testimony, okay? Because there are a couple places in the book of Revelation where it mentions those who have the testimony. So right here, it says in Revelation 11:7, it says, and when they have finished their testimony, this is referring to the two witnesses. But that's not the one I'm looking at. It's this one, Revelation 12:17. And the dragon was angry with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of Elohim and have the testimony of Yahushua HaMashiach. And then in Revelation 19:10, it says, and I fell at his feet, and he said unto me, see you do it not. I am your fellow servant and of your brethren that have the testimony of Yahushua. Worship Elohim, for the testimony of Yahushua is the spirit of prophecy. So when I was, in the summer of 2007, I was in a real, season of despair, and because I had lost my job, I didn't know how I was going to survive. And I was fasting and praying for like 40 days, went on a lemonade fast. And during that time, Yahuwah spoke to me and said, the seven feasts in Leviticus 23, they are the testimony of Yahushua. And I'm like, oh boy, you know how you see the commercials of I could have had a V8, you put your hand to your forehead and you go, well, gee, why didn't I think of that? It was like one of those moments like, well, duh, why didn't I think of, the seven feasts are his testimony, right? Now, I'm not going to read this whole blog because it's pretty long. It's a very lengthy blog. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of skip around certain places. And so I want to just go down to the place where I enumerate the feasts, the seven feasts that are outlined in Leviticus 23. And I talk about how Yahushua HaMashiach fulfilled. Now, I know some people would say, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. It's a graphic I made. Some would say, oh, well, he only fulfilled the 3 spring feasts at his first coming, and that he's going to fulfill the fall feasts at his second coming. Well, not quite. Actually, I've observed that he fulfilled all seven. In fact, you know what? I didn't put this into the blog, but I'm going to look for this graphic real quick. And here I actually enumerated the fact that he did fulfill all 7 feasts at his first coming, and he's going to fulfill all 7 of them again at his second coming. See, I believe the feasts of Yahuwah are prophetic in nature in such a way that they have ongoing fulfillments. We tend to think of there's only one fulfillment and that's the end of it. No, Yahuwah is the one who is and who was and who is to come. So if he has this ongoing existence throughout history and he's eternal, what makes us think that these feasts have only one fulfillment? No, there are ongoing fulfillments, I believe, throughout eternity. We're going to continue to see how these feasts continue to be fulfilled over and over again, teaching us deeper layers of truth with regard to these festivals. So let's talk about the first one. And you see, this was in the same pattern of Jacob. Remember Jacob, the patriarch, how he worked 2 periods of 7 years for his 2 brides, Rachel and Leah? Well, he wanted Rachel. She was the one he loved and wanted to marry. But Laban, his father-in-law, tricked him into marrying the firstborn daughter, Leah. And I guess back then they kept the bride's face covered during the wedding ceremony. And they must have been, Leah and Rachel must have been very similar in their body stature, because I guess he didn't recognize that he was marrying Leah. And I'm pretty sure they probably gave him a lot of wine and made him a little tipsy, so that when he went into the tent with her and consummated with her, he didn't realize who he was consummating with until the morning. And then when he realized he consummated with Leah instead of Rachel, his beloved, he went to Laban and said, "Why did you do this to me?" I'm paraphrasing, of course. "Why did you trick me into marrying Leah? You know I wanted Rachel." And Laban said, "Well, it's not our custom to marry off the younger daughter first. We always have to marry the first daughter first, the firstborn child first." And he said, "Listen, you fulfill the week with Leah. Just fulfill the week with Leah, and I'll let you have Rachel also." Okay, so we're so accustomed to thinking that Jacob had to work the full 14 years before he could marry Rachel, but that's not what it says in the text. It says that at the end of the week, after he had married Leah, he was also able to marry Rachel, but he still verbally agreed to work an additional 7 years for Laban, right? So in other words, what happened was Jacob was able to marry both brides within the same 14 days. And those 14 days were tucked in the middle of the 14 years. Okay. So those 14 days of marrying both brides were smack dab in the middle of the 14 years. Okay. And so this is prophetic, because you're going to see something here. Yahushua fulfilled all 7 feasts. Now, what does it say in John 1:11? We are told that he came for his own, and his own received him not. And who are his own? He came through the tribe of Judah, did he not? So in John 1:11, it says he came for his own, and his own received him not. That means he wanted the tribe of Judah. That was his beloved. Okay. Just like Jacob's beloved was Rachel, Yahushua's beloved was the kingdom of Judah. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. So what we have here is we have a shadow picture of Jacob being just like the Messiah. He comes with this expectancy, thinking he's getting Rachel, his beloved, and instead he gets Leah, who represents the firstborn. Well, who are the firstborn? When the kingdom of Judah rejected the gospel, who ended up hearing the gospel of Messiah? Well, it was the Gentile nations, right? It was the 13th tribe that we call Ephraim. Now, why do we assimilate Ephraim to the Gentile nations? Because right here in Genesis 48, when Jacob was about to die, he blessed Joseph's 2 sons, okay? And what did he do? He said, and he blessed them, both of Joseph's sons, that day, saying, "In you shall Israel bless saying, Elohim make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh, and he set Ephraim before Manasseh. So Ephraim was the younger son, but he placed Ephraim as the firstborn. Okay, now this is important because the names of these sons mean something. Ephraim means double fruit. So those in the nations who accepted the gospel of Yahushua for these last 2,000 years, we have become more abundant and more fruitful than those of the kingdom of Judah, right? Okay, but Manasseh means to cause to forget. Now, Joseph named him that because he went through so much turmoil and trauma from what his brothers had done to him that when he finally got married to Asenat, the Egyptian woman, and he has his first son, Manasseh, he's so thankful that now he's got a little bit of peace and rest in his life. And he's like saying, Manasseh, my firstborn son, has caused me to forget my turmoil, has caused me to forget all my suffering. But prophetically, Manasseh symbolizes the kingdom of Judah, because after the Romans came and destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, just as Messiah prophesied was going to happen, they were essentially forgotten about. For the last 2,000 years, we've heard Christians saying, oh, the Jews have rejected Messiah. They are no longer, they're saying that the Father doesn't have any more plans for the Yahudim, the Jewish people. They're kind of like out of his mind now. And they've been teaching this replacement theology, which is what Constantine, the Roman emperor, was famous for teaching, saying, oh, we Christians now have the gospel. We have Messiah. Those Jews are evil. They've rejected Messiah. And therefore, we should have nothing to do with them. So in the 4th century, Constantine, the Roman emperor, decided to change all the feast days of Yahushua and pretty much assimilated them and blended them with pagan mythology. Okay, because he didn't want to have anything to do with the Yahudim, the Jewish people. And what do we see now? We see Hebraic roots people, so-called Torah-observant people, having the same attitude in their hearts. Okay, and they don't realize they are behaving just like Constantine, the Roman emperor. They're going back to their Christian roots, even though they pretend to be coming back to their Torah roots. They're, in a sense, going back to their Constantinian roots. Now, don't get me wrong. I recognize there are secular Jews, Hollywood power Jews that are, they don't follow Torah at all. They're involved in the occult. They're involved in the Luciferian doctrine. They're involved in, Freemasonry, all this stuff. When I talk about the Yahudim that Yahushua came for at his first coming, the ones that he loves, just like Jacob loved Rachel. And when Yahushua came the first time, he wanted the kingdom of Judah. He's talking about those who really love him and love the Torah, not these, secular power Jews that they're only Jewish, ethnically speaking, but they're not following the scriptures. Okay. So when he talks about the synagogue of Satan, it has nothing to do with physical DNA or genealogy. That's not what he's talking about. He's not saying, oh, it's the white European Jews that are the synagogue of Satan. No, it has nothing to do with, what skin color you have. He's talking about those who love Torah and obey the Torah. Those who love the Torah and are obeying it, they're the ones he counts as the true Yahudim. Okay, those whose hearts are circumcised. That's the true definition of what is a true Yahudi or a true Jew. Paul said, those whose hearts are circumcised. In other words, they love the Torah and they are wanting to keep it to the best of their ability. So this idea that we broad brush all the Jews and we vilify all the people that live in the modern state of Israel and say that they're all the synagogue of Satan, that is from the pit of Sheol. Okay? So if you're espousing those ideas, or if you're listening to those that are espousing those ideas, you're on the wrong track, because guess what? Yahushua is coming back for the kingdom of Judah. And that's going to be the happiest day of his entire existence. Well, not that he's ever, has a beginning or an ending. He's without beginning or ending. But my point is, that's going to be one of the happiest days of his life, that he's going to get to marry the ones that he wanted all along, but they didn't receive him at his first coming. So my point is, Ephraim, he is the 13th tribe that was added to the 12 tribes. Manasseh represents the kingdom of Judah because they were pretty much forgotten these last 2,000 years. But something began to happen in 1948. And I don't really care if the Rothschild bankers were involved. I don't care if the United Nations were involved. Yahuwah doesn't care. He'll use the wealth of the wicked. Scripture tells us he uses the wealth of the wicked and he lays it up for the just. Okay? He established the modern state of Israel in 1948. Scripture tells us right here in Isaiah 61 that Israel became a nation in one day. Okay, Isaiah 66 is a prophecy about 1948, despite what some people want us to believe. Starting with Isaiah 66:7, it says, before she travailed, in other words, before the Great Tribulation, she brought forth, before her pain came. Well, see, now she's going through birth pains. But in 1948, she had just finished the birth pains with World War II, right? All the Yehudim, the Jews in Nazi camps, came back. So the pain was over for them for a short time. Before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child. Well, at that time, the man-child were the remnant who went back to, to the land, right? And it says, who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? And that word earth is eretz. It's really more specifically talking about the land of Israel. Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Sion travailed, she brought forth her children. So there are those who are of the physical seed of Abraham. Remember, Abraham who had two kinds of seed. Yahuwah told him that his seed would be those that were like the sands on the seashore. Those are the earthly descendants. And then he said that Abraham would have seed that would be more numerous than the stars of the heavens. Those are the ones that are born again, born from above. Because of Messiah's blood, we become Abraham's seed. We're told in Galatians 3:28. Okay? So he said, shall I bring to birth and not cause to bring forth? Says Yahuwah. Shall I cause to bring forth and shut the womb? Says your Elohim. Rejoice you with Yerushalayim and be glad with her. You that love her, rejoice for joy with her. All you that mourn for her. We're supposed to be mourning with Jerusalem. Those that are taking the side of Hamas and the Palestinians, man, your heart is in the wrong place. You need to repent. Okay? He says, rejoice with Yerushalayim and be glad with her. All you that love her, rejoice for joy with her. You that mourn for her. Okay, I'm not talking about the evil, wicked government. I'm not talking about Netanyahu and all these people that are part of the political Zionist agenda. I'm talking about the people that live there because they love Yahuwah, they love the scriptures, they love the Torah. Those are the people that we should be rejoicing with. And not to mention the land itself belongs to Yahuwah because it says in scripture he has chosen to place his name there. Okay? So when you speak evil against the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the inhabitants of Israel, you're speaking evil against his name because his name is written there. Okay? So be careful what you say with your mouth, lest you curse yourself. Okay? People need to look at things in a nuanced way and recognize We're taking the side of the nation of Israel, not because of the wicked political Zionists. We're taking the side of the land of Israel because that's where Yahuwah has chosen to place his name there. And Jacob is wrestling right now. Jacob is wrestling. Okay, there's a wrestling match going on right now in the land. Okay, and if you're going to take the side of Jacob's enemy, then you don't belong to Jacob. You don't get to be called Israel. Okay? So it says, rejoice you with Yerushalayim and be glad with her. All you that love her, rejoice for joy with her. You that mourn for her, that you may suck and be satisfied with the breasts of her consolations, that you may milk out and be delighted with the abundance of her glory. Well, what's he talking about? It's the word. The word of Yahuwah came out of where? The kingdom of Judah, Jerusalem. Okay? The Bible that you're reading would not exist if Jerusalem did not exist. And then he goes on, he says, for thus says Yahuwah, behold, I will extend shalom, peace to her like a river, and the glory of the Goyim, the Gentiles, like a flowing stream. Then shall you suck, and you shall be borne upon her sides, and be dandled upon her knees. You know how we do that with newborn babies? We dandle them on our knees. As one whom his mother comforts, so will I comfort you, and you shall be comforted in Yerushalayim. And when you see this, your heart shall rejoice, and your bones shall flourish like an herb, and the hand of Yahuwah shall be known toward his servants, and his indignation toward his enemies. So it's time for you, Hebrew roots people, Netzarim, those who claim to be Torah observant, to choose the correct side. And if you're on the wrong side, you will experience his wrath and his indignation. Okay? We're not supporting the Zionist government. No. We're supporting the land because Yahuwah's name is written therein. And we're supporting the people who love the Torah, who live there. Okay? And if you're on the wrong side, then you're going to remain on the wrong side and follow the beast. Okay? So, I said all of this because Jacob worked for 7 years and got Leah. And the first 7 years that he worked correlate directly to the 7 feasts that our Messiah kept at his first coming. Okay? First thing he kept was Passover, Pesach, right? So he kept Pesach. That was his death, the day that he died. That's the first feast on the menorah, right? Unleavened bread, Hag Matzah. Hag means feast. Feast of unleavened bread. That's when he was buried. The following night, after his Passover meal with his disciples, right? First fruits, Yom HaBikurim, his resurrection. Now, some people think that first fruits begins on the first day of the week. Well, it does, but historically speaking, in the closing minutes of the weekly Shabbat, it was customary for the high priest in the temple, especially in first century Jerusalem, when the Sadducees controlled the temple. They determined that the high priest would go out and cut the first fruits of the barley while it was still the 7th day of the week in the closing minutes. Now, some people would say, but that's violating the Sabbath. No, it's not. Because our Messiah said that the priests are blameless in doing certain kinds of work because they're doing it with the ministry in mind. So, in other words, the priests bake the new showbread on Shabbat, and they trade out the old showbread every Shabbat. So when it's ministry-related work, it's allowed. The only kind of work we're not allowed to do on the Sabbath days is work that is about earning a paycheck. Okay, but if it's work related to ministry, work that's related to the kingdom of heaven, yes, we are allowed to do that type of work. So in the closing minutes of the Sabbath day, the high priests would go and cut the first barley and wave it before Yahweh as a first fruits offering. And our Messiah did the same thing. Okay, when he resurrected, when the women went back to the tomb, and it was still the Sabbath day, it was still the seventh day of the week, but it was, sundown was approaching. His body was gone. The stone was rolled away, and they recognized that he was gone. He waved the first fruits just at the same time that the high priest did, right? Scripture tells us in Ephesians 4:8-9 that he went into the lower parts of the earth, and it says he gave gifts unto men. Well, where's the lower parts of the earth? It's Abraham's bosom. He spoke about it in Luke 16. Abraham's bosom was a temporary holding place for all those who died in times past prior to his crucifixion. They were righteous souls, but because they had not heard the gospel yet and had not received his blood atonement yet, they were being held in this place called Abraham's bosom. Well, he went there and he preached the gospel to all those souls in Abraham's bosom. And then what did he do? Scripture tells us in Matthew 27 that all these people had resurrected from the dead. The moment that there was an earthquake and Yahushua drew his last breath and said, "It is finished," there were people that resurrected. And they were seen walking around. And so what did he do? He brought all those souls to the Father in heaven. Remember, after he resurrected, he said to Mary of Magdala, he said, "Don't touch me. I have not yet, ascended to my Father." So that same day, he brought those souls to the Father in heaven after he had that encounter with Mary Magdala. He said he ascended to the Father and brought those souls with him to heaven and presented them as his first fruits wave sheaf offering. Okay, 50 days later, Shabuot, the Feast of Weeks, he promised he was going to baptize us with the Holy Spirit and fire, with the Ruach HaKodesh and fire. Well, even though 10 days earlier, he ascended back to the Father in Acts 1:11, he told his disciples, "Go to Jerusalem and wait. Wait for the outpouring of the Ruach HaKodesh. Wait." And so he told them, "You shall receive power after the Ruach HaKodesh comes upon you, and you shall be witnesses unto me, both in Judea and in Samaria and unto the uttermost parts of the earth." Okay, so he didn't just fulfill the 3 spring feasts, he fulfilled this one too. Pentecost, Shabuot, he poured out his spirit just as he promised he would. Remember John, his cousin Yehukanan, said, "I baptize you with water, but the one who comes after me, he shall baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire," right? So he did it after he ascended to the Father. So to say, "Oh, he only fulfilled the spring feast," no, he went beyond that. He even kept number 4, the 4th feast. Okay. Now, trumpets. This is when he was actually born. Now, I know some people think he was born on Sukkot, but I began my research on when he was born back in 2002, right after the events of 9/11. I became extremely curious about these feasts. And when I began to ask the question, "Father, when is the true birth of Messiah?" and I read Dr. Ernest L. Martin's book, The Star That Astonished the World, I found an overwhelming amount of evidence that the constellation that was visible on the night he was born is from Revelation chapter 12. The woman, which is the virgin Betula, she was giving birth to the man-child, which is Ariel, the lion of the tribe of Judah. She was giving birth to the Messiah who would rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to Elohim. In other words, our Messiah ascended back to the Father 40 days after he resurrected. We read about that in Acts chapter 1. So he was born on the Feast of Trumpets, according to the astronomical record and according to lots of biblical corroboration. We have the biblical corroboration of these events, okay, because his cousin John was 6 months younger than him, and his father, Zechariah, was visited by Gabriel in Luke's gospel. And it says that, Zechariah, John's father, and his wife Elizabeth had been barren all these years. They were in their old age and had never borne a child together. And now they were about to produce an heir. And that heir was John, Yahuchanan, the immerser, otherwise known as John the Baptist. He was born to Elizabeth and Zechariah. And so Luke's gospel tells us that when it was Elizabeth's 6th month of pregnancy, it says she hid herself for 5 months, but in her 6th month, Mary of, Miriam, our Messiah's mother, came and visited her in the 6th month. And that's when she was conceived in the womb. When Messiah was conceived in the womb of Miriam, was in Elizabeth's 6th month. Okay. Now, I've had people say that, no, John was conceived in the 6th Hebrew month on the calendar. No. You're not reading that properly. Read the whole chapter of Luke chapter 2. It says it's the 6th month with her, meaning Elizabeth. It's her 6th month of pregnancy. It wasn't the 6th month in the year, but people don't read that properly. Okay. So we know that John was conceived at Pentecost. It was at the Feast of Weeks when Zechariah was fulfilling his priestly duty. It was in the third Shabbat of the year. The third Shabbat in the third month of the year. Okay, Sivan, the month of Sivan. So when we count 271 days for an average male gestation, and the reason why we use 271 days is because, generally speaking, girls take longer, up to 10 days longer in the womb, and boys, a male child, has a approximately 10-day shorter gestation period. And I believe those extra 10 days have something to do with the 10 virgins and the 10 days of awe, which I'll talk about that another time. But I believe there's a prophetic reason why female child in the womb takes 10 days longer. Okay, so John was born on the 1st of Abib, 14 days before Pesach. Okay, if you count 180 days from there, it lands precisely on the Feast of Trumpets when our Messiah was born. If you count backwards 271 days, it lands precisely on Hanukkah. So Miriam, our Messiah's mother, conceived on Hanukkah, and we have biblical proof of that in several different ways, but in the book of Haggai, chapter 2, 18 through 20, it gives us a hint that the seed, which is Messiah, would be in the barn. The barn is a metaphor for Miriam's womb, okay? And so the seed would be in the barn on the 24th day of the 9th month, which is Hanukkah, okay? So the eve of Hanukkah, okay? Now, he was actually born at sundown on the first day of the 7th Hebrew month, which the Bible calls Etanim, but in modern times they say Tishri. So he was conceived at sundown just before the date changed to Tishri 2. Okay, so if we start counting from Tishri 2, then we can come exactly to his circumcision 8 days later. Okay, we are told in Leviticus 23 that Yom Kippur begins in the evening at the 9th day of the 7th month, When the sun goes down, then the date changes and becomes the 10th day of the 7th month. So if we start counting from Tishri 2, okay, because he was born just minutes before sundown on Tishri 1, therefore we start to count at Tishri 2. We count 8 days. It's exactly 8 days, okay, from when he was born until he was circumcised as an infant on Yom Kippur. Now, what is prophetic about this is what happens when a baby boy is being circumcised. His blood sprinkles all over the place. It just sprinkles everywhere, right? Well, we are told in Scripture that he shall sprinkle many nations with his blood, right? Sprinkle. Let me find that word. Sprinkle. Okay, let me see if I can find it. I think it's in the book of Isaiah. Sprinkle nations. Yeah, here it is. Isaiah 52:15. So shall he sprinkle many nations. The kings shall shut their mouths at him. For that which had not been told them shall they see, and that which they had not heard shall they consider. So it is so much more prophetic that his circumcision as an 8-day-old infant would take place on Yom Kippur, right? Because it means the Day of Atonement. It's when the priest would sprinkle the blood of the goat 7 times, okay, on the mercy seat. So Yahushua already beginning to show who he was as an infant, but even moving forward as a 30-year-old man, he began his ministry. In Luke chapter 4:14 through 20, he had told us who he is. And this happened to be on Yom Kippur. How do we know that Luke chapter 4 is taking place on Yom Kippur? Because he used language that is only used on Yom Kippur. Okay, the first thing he does, he's reading out of Isaiah 61, and it says, the Spirit of Yahuwah is upon me because he has anointed me. And that word anointed is Mashiach, which means Messiah. So right there, he's telling them, I'm the anointed one, the Mashiach that you've been waiting for. Okay. And then he says, to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted and to preach deliverance to the captives and the recovering of sight to the blind. Well, who are the most blinded out of all the tribes of Israel to the truth of who Messiah is? It's the kingdom of Judah, right? Okay. Yahuwah said, Paul even said this, and even Jacob, when he was dying and he's blessing his sons, it says his eyes were growing dim for age. So Jacob represents the whole nation of Israel. Okay. So he's saying he's going to come and recover the sight of the blind. Well, many of the 10 northern tribes that were in exile within the nations, their eyes were open to the gospel. Many who call themselves born-again Christians today don't even realize they're probably descended from one of those 10 lost tribes, and he recovered their sight. Okay. And it says to set at liberty them that are bruised, crushed. He's talking about those who have been crushed in life. You go through trauma. We've all been through trauma in life, right? And then he says to preach the acceptable year of Yahuwah. Well, that's whenever you hear the phrase the acceptable year of Yahuwah, that's talking about a Jubilee year. And when are the priests in the temple required to announce a Jubilee year? It's on Yom Kippur. So every 50th year is ushered in with 2 silver trumpets. Okay, and we read about this in Numbers chapter 10. It says, and Yahuwah spoke unto Moshe, saying, make you 2 trumpets of silver of a whole piece shall you make them, that you may use them for the calling of the assembling and for the journeying of the camps. Okay, so they were supposed to sound the Jubilee every 50th year with 2 silver trumpets. But now what do you have? You have Yahushua, who's not from the tribe of Levi. He's from the tribe of Judah, and he's the one who's preaching the acceptable year. So you can imagine these people who knew the Torah were saying, but he's not a Levite. He's announcing the acceptable year. Oh, wait a minute. Is he saying he's a high priest? Wait a minute. Is he saying he's the Mashiach? Okay. And then he only reads half the verse. He doesn't finish the verse to preach the acceptable year. And then the other half of the verse, which is in Isaiah 61, says, and the day of vengeance of our Elohim. Okay. Isaiah 61:2, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahuwah and the day of vengeance of our Elohim, to comfort all that mourn. Well, when is the day of vengeance going to be? Okay, we read it right here in Revelation 19. Okay, it says, for true and righteous are his judgments, for he has judged the great whore which did corrupt the earth with her fornication and has avenged. You see that word avenge means to take vengeance. Okay, it's the day of vengeance. Okay, and even, if we look in Bible Gateway, day of vengeance, it's the day of Yahuwah's wrath. Wrath to those who don't follow Yahuwah, but those of us who do follow him, it's not going to be a day of wrath for us. It's going to be full on vindication. We're going to be vindicated. Okay, we're talking about Isaiah 34, verse 8, for it is the day of Yahuwah's vengeance, the year of recompenses for the controversy of Zion. Okay, Isaiah 61:2, he calls it the day of vengeance of our Elohim, to comfort all that mourn. Isaiah 63:4, for the day of vengeance is in my heart, and the year of my redeemed is come. He talks about it again in Jeremiah 46:10, for this is the day of Yahuwah Elohim of hosts, the day of vengeance, that he may avenge him of all his adversaries, and the sword shall devour, and it shall be satiate, and made drunk with their blood. For Yahuwah Elohim of hosts has a sacrifice in the north country by the river Euphrates. Okay, and then in Luke 21:22, Yahushua says, for these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. He's talking about the future. He's talking about the day that he comes back for the second time. It's going to be the day of vengeance. Okay, so he fulfilled the Feast of Day of Atonement twice. First as an infant when he was circumcised, but also as an adult. He was showing that he's Melchizedek, the high priest, who's the only one who qualifies to usher in a Jubilee year. Okay, the next Jubilee year, according to Josephus, the Jewish historian, from what I can calculate, would probably be 2028. Okay, now I'm not prophesying that. I'm just saying, based on the data that we have thus far, it's looking like Yom Kippur 2028 could possibly be the date that our Messiah might return. Okay? So I believe that everything that's going on right now is leading up to the man of sin, the son of perdition, is going to show up in the temple claiming that he's Elohim. He's going to set up an image to the beast, which I believe will be AI. And the two witnesses will begin their ministry that lasts for 1,260 days. And concurrently, the beast is going to speak blasphemies against the Most High for 42 months. We're coming up on that very, very soon. Okay. Sukkot. Messiah dwelled in a sukkah with his parents. Scripture tells us in John chapter 1, and I know the reason why a lot of people think he was born on Sukkot is because of this passage of scripture in the book of John, where it says that, right here, it says, and the word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Well, this word dwelt is the Greek word skenu, which means to tent, to Sukkot. Like he Sukkoted with us, right? He dwelt among us. So because of that one verse, they surmise that he was born on Feast of Tabernacles. But I submit to you that all three of these fall feasts were the season of his nativity. Okay. So he was born on trumpets, circumcised Yom Kippur, dwelt among us as a 14-day infant on Sukkot. Just like the first three spring feasts, okay, they're kind of like, died on Pesach, buried on unleavened bread, resurrected first fruits. So you see, just like the three spring feasts are the season of his death, the three fall feasts are like the season of his nativity. Okay, you see that? So it's not true that he only fulfilled, these at his first coming, because then what about this? What about Feast of Weeks? He did pour out his spirit like he said he would. And then those who say he only fulfilled the three feasts at his first coming, the three spring feasts, well, then when was he born? Those who say he was born on tabernacles, okay, if they say he was born on tabernacles, right? Well, then what? Now there's two feasts that are unfulfilled, right? So that means what? He only fulfilled 5 feasts at his first coming, leaving these 2 undone? That doesn't make sense, does it? Of course it doesn't. So obviously, he didn't just fulfill 3 spring feasts. He also fulfilled Shabuot. He poured out his Ruach like he said he would. And those that say he was born on tabernacles, then that means these 2 feasts he didn't fulfill. No. No, Yahuwah showed me. He fulfilled all of them. All 7 of them at his first coming. Why? Because he's like Jacob. Jacob worked for 7 years for his first bride, which he thought was going to be Rachel, but it ended up being Leah. Then he agreed to work yet another 7 years for Rachel after he married Leah. So just like Jacob, our Messiah I believe he fulfilled the 7 feasts at his first coming, and then at his second coming, he's going to fulfill them all over again. And think about this. What is a feast? Let's look at Leviticus 23. What exactly is a feast? Okay, when Yahuwah says, these are my feasts, that word feast is moed. It means an appointment, a fixed time or season. Okay, and it actually means a year, conventionally a year. Why? Because within a year's time, we keep a cycle of 7 festivals. So a year is a moed. So whenever we see the phrase a time, times, and a half, like such as in Daniel, Daniel asked the messenger, how long is the tribulation period going to last? He says, how long shall it be until the end of these wonders, right? And the messenger told him, it shall be for a time, times, and a half. So the word time is moed, which means a year, 1 annual cycle of feasts. And then times would be plural of that, which would be 2 years. And then a half of a moed would be 6 months. Okay, 6 months. So whenever we see the phrase time, times, and a half, we know that's only 3.5 years. So in the same way, the tribulation is going to, I believe, start with Passover. I believe the 2 witnesses are going to start their ministry probably at Passover, okay? And then 6 months later, okay, on the Feast of Trumpets, because if you count exactly 180 days from Passover, it lands precisely on the Feast of Trumpets. So the first 6 months of the times and a half is from Passover to trumpets. And then from trumpets to trumpets, okay, 3 more Feasts of Trumpets. So their ministry is going to last from trumpets to trumpets to trumpets. And then what? The bride is caught up to heaven to be with Messiah. And we're only going to be gone for 10 days. Then we're coming back 10 days later. Smyrna has to suffer tribulation for 10 days. So we're coming back with him as his army, and we're going to be fighting in a war with him. We're coming back on Yom Kippur. And there's the other half of the bride that's going to be standing there waiting for him at the Mount of Olives. The other half of the bride represents Rachel. They represent the kingdom of Judah. The Jews that didn't accept him in time to be caught up to the wedding here on trumpets. Philadelphia has the open door that no man can shut. Philadelphia has not denied his name. That's why we get to go, Philadelphia gets to go here on trumpets. Philadelphia represents the wise virgins that have the oil of his name in their lamps. But 10 days later, we come back with Messiah, and there's this other half of the bride, which they're told to go by the oil of his name. The wise virgins said to the foolish, go buy the oil. And they do. And Messiah comes back and it says, they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourns for his only son. So all those Jewish people, the inhabitants of Jerusalem that didn't know him yet, didn't know his name yet, they didn't take the mark of the beast. They're not worshiping the beast. They don't worship his image. They didn't take his mark. They love Torah, but they don't know his name yet. They just call him Hashem. They don't know it's Yahushua HaMashiach yet. But during those 10 days, when the wise virgins said, go buy your own oil, they figure it out. During those 10 days, they figure it out. And when he comes back and lands his feet on the Mount of Olives and the mountain splits in half, they're going to be mourning for him. They're going to be weeping and sobbing, just like Joseph's brothers when they didn't recognize Joseph, because Joseph was dressed up like a Egyptian. He took off his Egyptian costume, and he went by the name Zaphnath Paneah. They didn't recognize that name. That was an Egyptian name. Just like the Jewish people don't recognize the name Jesus. That's a heathen name, right? But now they're going to, Yahushua is going to come down on the Mount of Olives, and he's going to reveal himself. And they're going to go, oh my goodness, we didn't recognize you before. We thought you were a heathen, pagan deity by the name of Jesus that was born on December 25th because the Christians distorted your image. We didn't know, and he's going to forgive them. He's going to forgive them, okay? And they're going to accept him. So the first bride that typifies Leah, who Jacob married first, they also represent Philadelphia, who have the open door that no man can shut. They have not denied his name. They also represent the wise virgins because they have the oil of his name. But then there's this other bride, Rachel, that represents the kingdom of Judah. Now, some people might object and say, well, why would Rachel represent the kingdom of Judah? It was Leah that gave birth to Judah. That's true. But the reason being is that Rachel's body was buried in Bethlehem, Judah, in Ephrat. If you read the account in Genesis, her body was buried in Ephrat, which is another name for Bethlehem, Judah. And remember when King Herod killed all the baby boys under 2 years old? The gospel says Rachel weeping for her children, for they were not. That's a prophecy out of the book of Jeremiah. Okay? Rachel weeping for her children. So, Rachel, okay, it's spelled without a C, weeping, weeping children. In the book of Jeremiah 31:15, it says, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel, weeping for her children, refused to be comforted for her children because they were not. Okay, and then in the gospel, you add the letter C to the name Rachel, and there you have the same prophecy. Matthew 2:18. In Ramah there was a voice heard, lamentation and weeping, and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and would not be comforted because they are not. So you see, even though Rachel's not the mother of Judah, she became a metaphor for the kingdom of Judah. Because why? Rachel died young, giving birth to Benjamin, because she had these idols that she was hiding from Jacob, and Jacob didn't know about the idols, and he pronounced a curse, not realizing he was cursing his beloved. He said, whoever has the idols, let him die. Well, Rachel died not too long after that, giving birth to Benjamin. So he didn't know he's cursing his beloved, okay? But just like the same way, Yahushua prophesied over the kingdom of Judah, whom he loved, with tears, and said, "O Jerusalem, you who stone all the prophets that come unto you." How many times I wanted to gather you as a mother hen gathers her chickens, but you would not. And then he said, your house is left to you desolate. So the pattern is there, okay? So now, what about how's he going to fulfill these feasts at his second coming? Well, I'm just speculating here. I don't know exactly how it's all going to unfold, but I see that I believe the two witnesses are going to probably begin their ministry on Pesach, Passover, right? But here's why. Because here's why I think that. Because look at Matthew 24. In Matthew 24, Yahushua tells us precisely when the Great Tribulation begins. Okay? He says, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. And I know some people say that's the jab. And yeah, that's a spiritual application of it. Okay? But that's not the total fulfillment of this prophecy. The total fulfillment is going to be something that we see with our eyes. I believe it's going to be televised. Everyone's going to see it. So he says, when you shall see the abomination of desolation, which I believe is AI. I believe there's going to be an image standing in the temple that's artificial intelligence, and everyone who's been jabbed are going to be hooked up to that motherboard, that mainframe, right? They're going to become one mind with the beast, just as it says in Revelation 17 that they become one mind with the beast. Okay, so he says, when you see this, and then a few verses later, he says, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Okay? So the Great Tribulation begins the moment that we see the abomination of desolation. So I believe this is when the ministry of the two witnesses begins. And I believe concurrently it's when the false ministry of the man of sin begins. Because the moment he sets up this abominable image in the temple, then that's when he begins speaking blasphemies for 42 months from the temple, declaring himself to be Elohim. Okay, that lasts for 42 months, which is exactly the same length as 1,260 days. And during this time, the two witnesses are prophesying against him. They are so bold that they're in Jerusalem speaking out against him. And guess what? If anyone tries to kill them, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. So in other words, they're going to be able to speak out against him for 3.5 years, and he won't be able to touch them until their ministry is finished. So it's going to be like a showdown. It's going to be just like when the prophet Elijah was out on Mount Carmel, and, the Baal worshipers are whipping themselves and trying to call down fire, and it's not happening. And Elijah's making fun of them and saying, where is your Elohim? Perhaps he's taking a nap. Perhaps he's on a journey. He's making fun of them. mocking them, right? So at the same time that the Baal worshipers are trying to demonstrate their power of Baal, Elijah the prophet is demonstrating his true fire that shows up, even though he watered the sacrifice with 3 barrels of water. The whole trench is filled with water, and yet the fire from heaven manifested and licked up all the water. And everybody knew who the true Elohim is. Okay, so these 2 witnesses are going to be, I believe, not just 2 individuals, although there probably will be 2 individuals who represent, right? But the 2 witnesses, it says, are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks, which means the 2 houses of Israel and the 2 overcoming assemblies, which are Smyrna and Philadelphia. So I believe the 2 witnesses are going to be 2 corporate bodies of people throughout the world who are going to be testifying, who are going to be warning people and preaching against the false Messiah. But at the same time, there might be 2 individuals who represent these 2 groups. Okay, that's how I'm seeing it right now. So I believe that's probably going to happen on Pesach, okay? Because why? The devil, the son of perdition is going to try to imitate the real Messiah. So when would he likely manifest himself in the temple? On Passover, right? When the true Messiah, the Lamb of Elohim, was slain. So of course he's going to try to call himself he's probably going to say, I'm a reincarnation of Jesus Christ. That's probably what he's going to say, right? And Trump's family, they claim that they're descended from Jesus Christ. I'm just using their vernacular, right? They claim that Jesus and Mary Magdalene got married and they had a child together named Sarah, and that when Yahushua was being crucified, they smuggled Mary Magdalene out of Jerusalem and she went to France. And they believe that she gave birth to this little girl named Sarah, and all these people in Europe who they call blue bloods, there's these aristocratic families, they claim they're the Merovingians. They claim they're direct descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. Well, Trump's family on his father's side claimed this about themselves. They say they're descended from Jesus Christ, okay? Which, of course, is ridiculous because we know our Messiah didn't marry Mary Magdalene. But this is a satanic myth that these people have invented, okay? So I believe the false Messiah is going to convince people he's the reincarnation. In other words, yeah, I'm Jesus Christ reincarnated, And perhaps, I'm just speculating here. I don't know exactly how it's going to happen or how it's going to unfold. What if he were to erect an image of Christ, like a statue that everybody has, gotten used to seeing what this image of, Christ looks like. The Catholic Church has the Shroud of Turin that they claim they've already extracted DNA from this burial cloth, and they claim that they've already cloned Jesus from this DNA in the shroud. So what if this false Messiah takes the clone and, augments it with artificial intelligence? Now what we would have is, a clone of Jesus Christ with artificial intelligence in it. So that's just me speculating how this might be fulfilled. Okay, I don't know exactly. I'm not prophesying it. I'm postulating maybe this is how it could happen. But I definitely believe it's probably going to be on Passover. This is when the 2 witnesses ministry begins. This is also when the false Messiah begins to speak blasphemies. I believe it's probably when he would set up an image to the beast. Okay. Unleavened bread. Well, we're told in Revelation 14:5 that the 144,000 have no guile. They have no deception in them. Well, what does leaven represent? Leaven represents deception. Remember what our Messiah said? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Why was he telling us that? Because leaven has to do with guile. To beguile someone means to deceive someone. Okay. They have no guile, no fault, okay, in them. So the 144,000, I believe, are the two witnesses. When they are resurrected, they become the 144,000, right? But it's not a literal number. It's 144,000 heads of households. Because how is Israel numbered? In Numbers chapter 1, they numbered them by the head of a household. So it's 144,000 families. It's not 144,000 individuals, okay? And we know this because even when Israel was leaving Egypt, it said there were 600,000 men that left Egypt. This number didn't include the women and the children, nor the livestock. So when you include the women and the children, it was probably a much larger number than 600,000. It was probably well over 1 million. Okay. And so 144,000 that have no leaven in them. They're just like Messiah. They have his nature. And then first fruits. After the beast kills the two witnesses, they are resurrected. But of course, they're going to be resurrected on Pentecost. Not on first fruits, but on the Feast of Trumpets. But I believe that first fruits represents not when they're physically resurrected, but when they begin to do their signs and their wonders, the fire that comes out of their mouth, and they begin to do their ministry for 3.5 years. Okay. They will preach the gospel for 3.5 years. Okay. Revelation 14:6 talks about the everlasting gospel right here. It says, and I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. So these 144,000, I believe they represent the two witnesses, okay? The corporate two witnesses, right? Yom Teruah, the rebirth of the bride. Just as our Messiah was born physically into this world on the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, the bride of Messiah will also be reborn into immortality. She's going to put on incorruption, okay? Then we're going to be in heaven. The bride's going to be in heaven with Messiah for 10 days. Okay, this is just like the Noah's Ark account where he told them to go into the ark, and he says, wait for 7 days. And then after 7 days, it's going to start raining. So they were in the ark protected. And then 7 days later, after they were in the ark, that's when the rain began to fall, which the rain came as a form of wrath on the earth because it flooded the whole earth and destroyed all the wicked people. So the 7-day wedding of Messiah and his bride in the huppah in heaven is going to be for 7 days, but it's going to be inside the 10 days of awe. Okay, so it's going to be inside 7 days, inside the 10 days. And then the bride comes back with Messiah, and he makes his appearance on the Mount of Olives on all those Jewish people who didn't accept him yet, but they didn't take the mark of the beast. They didn't, some of them will be killed. Yahushua told Smyrna, don't be afraid. You might be put in prison. You might be killed. He said, but be faithful unto death. So I believe Smyrna are people that are going to be martyred for their faith. They're going to be resurrected when he comes back, but they probably won't put on incorruption. I'm guessing they probably won't be putting on an immortal body because they missed the harpazo. The harpazo is when the bride is caught up to heaven and she's given a heavenly body, an immortal body, right? So because they missed this event, they accept Yahushua down here at the second coming when he appears at the Mount of Olives. And yeah, they'll be resurrected, but they probably will not be given an immortal body. They'll continue to procreate and have children and populate the earth, okay? And then finally, we're going to have the marriage supper of the Lamb, which is the wedding feast. Because think about this, in ancient times, the way ancient weddings were done in Israel was that the bride and groom eloped first. They went off for 7 days, and the bridegroom would build a honeymoon suite, a huppah. You know, a huppah means a honeymoon suite, right? He built a huppah for his bride on his father's estate. And our Messiah said, I go and prepare a place for you. He told us this in John 14. He says, in my Father's house are many mansions. So yes, the bride will be taken to the Father's house. Just like in ancient Hebrew weddings, the bridegroom would go away to his father's house after they became engaged and they signed a ketubah. The bride and the groom would sign a ketubah. The father of the bride would sign it also. Then he would go away for a time to prepare this honeymoon suite for his bride. And then he would come back for her and he would marry her and he would whisk her off to the honeymoon suite, right? Whisk her off to the honeymoon suite in his father's house. For us, that's heaven. Then after 7 days, then they would go and have a big feast with the friends and the family of the bride. So when the bride comes back, we're going to be feasting, and all the Gentile nations, all those Gentiles that, you know, it says right here in Matthew 22, we have a pattern for the marriage supper of the Lamb right here. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a king, a certain king, which made a marriage for his son, and sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding, and they would not come. In other words, those who were supposed to be there from the kingdom of Judah, 2/3 of the inhabitants of Jerusalem are going to not accept him. They're going to accept the mark of the beast probably. And he says, again, he sent forth other servants, saying, tell them which are bidden, behold, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fatlings are killed, and all things are ready. Come unto the marriage. But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his farm, another to his merchandise. And the remnant took his servants and entreated them spitefully and slew them. He's talking about Jerusalem, how they would stone all the prophets that were sent to them. But when the king heard thereof, he was angry, and he sent forth his armies. That's the armies that come back from heaven, all of Messiah's bride that has come back to earth with him as his army. It says he sent forth his armies and destroyed those murderers and burned up their city. Then says he to his servants, the wedding is ready, but they which were bidden were not worthy. In other words, the inhabitants of Jerusalem who reject him, the 2/3 that reject him, only 1/3 of the inhabitants of Jerusalem are going to be accepting him. We read this in Zechariah 13. Okay, Zechariah 13. Let me show you. Zechariah 13. Okay, it says here, awake, O sword, against my shepherd and against the man that is my fellow, says Yahuwah of hosts. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered, and I will turn my hand upon the little ones. And it shall come to pass that in all the land, says Yahuwah, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the 3rd shall be left therein. And I will bring the 3rd part through the fire, and I will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, Yahuwah is my Elohim. So Matthew 22 is describing this event. He's saying those from the kingdom of Judah that were bidden, that were invited, they were not worthy. Okay? So then he says, go therefore into the highways, and as many as you shall find, bid to the marriage. So now he sends his servants to go and find all those in the nations, those that say that they are born again Christians. He's going to go find them, and they're going to come to the wedding, okay? So those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all, as many as they found, both bad and good, and the wedding was furnished with guests. So there's going to be those at the wedding that are guests. They're not going to be the bride, but they'll be there as a guest. So maybe they're Christians. Maybe they just didn't have all the pieces, like they didn't understand, about the feasts or about the Sabbath or whatever, but they didn't take the mark of the beast. They didn't worship his image. They had enough discernment to recognize that. So Yahuwah is going to invite them to come to the wedding. Okay. And when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. So in other words, nobody's getting into this wedding without a garment. And what qualifies you to have a wedding garment? You must be washed in the blood of the Lamb. In other words, you must have repented and asked for the blood of the Lamb to cleanse you. And he said unto him, Friend, how came you in here not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then said the king to the servants, Bind him hand and foot, and take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. So, that's what this is about. That's what this to Sukkot, I believe, is about. It's going to be this feast that's taking place down here on earth. I believe the bride will be there, the two brides, of Jacob, those that represent Smyrna and those that represent Philadelphia, those that represent Leah and those that represent Rachel, those that represent the wise virgins and those that represent the foolish. The two houses of Israel shall become one stick in his hand, and by Sukkot, the bride will be ready to have this wedding feast with him, but there will be guests there from the nations. Maybe they weren't Torah observant, but they were obedient to what they did know. They were obedient to the things they did understand, right? Because he talks about the goat and sheep nations, okay? Sheep nations, right? The goat nations and the sheep nations. What does he judge them for? He doesn't judge them based on whether they kept the feast or the Sabbath. He judges them based on, did you feed the hungry? Did you clothe the naked? So, he says, did you visit those in prison? In other words, even though a lot of Christians don't know about the feasts, they don't know about the Sabbath, they're just uneducated about this stuff. He's going to look at the weightier matters. He's going to say to these nations, these goyim in the nations, those who visited, those who, fed the hungry, they clothed the naked, they visited those in prisons. They were kind to their fellow man. Okay. Those are the people that are probably going to be guests at the wedding. They won't be the bride, but they'll probably be the guests because they kept the weightier matters of Torah. Okay. So that's what, this is how I see Yahushua fulfilling all 7 feasts at his first coming, and then possibly another round of 7 feasts leading up to his second coming. But like I said, all these feasts are not limited to one fulfillment. I see him continuing to fulfill them over and over and over again because he's the one who is and who was and who is to come. So it's a mistake to say, oh, well, he only fulfilled 3 of them at his first coming. No, he fulfilled all 7 of them at his first coming. He's going to continue to fulfill all of them over and over and over again throughout the millennium. Okay, now, this is so important because I've seen a few people recently who have tried to rearrange the branches on the menorah. Okay, I've seen these incorrect models popping up on Facebook, and I'm like, what are they doing? So some people claim that first fruits is not a feast. They're saying it's not a feast. They're saying it's just when the priest waves the barley in the temple. Okay, and I'm going to prove that they're wrong. Okay, so the way they have it is they have Passover as the first feast. They have unleavened bread as the second feast. And then they skip first fruits and they just jump to Pentecost. So one lady was teaching this on Facebook this week. And then she claims the weekly Sabbath is a feast. But see, the reason why the weekly Sabbath is not included is because the 7 feasts are annual Sabbaths. They're annual festivals. The weekly Sabbath is not included in the 7 annual feasts because it's a weekly event, not an annual event. Okay, but her reasoning was that Yahushua resurrected on Saturday evening, which is true. It was what we would today call Saturday evening, Shabbat. So she says, because he resurrected on the weekly Sabbath, the 7th day of the week, that she claims he didn't resurrect on first fruits. Because what she doesn't understand, what this lady doesn't understand, is that in the Jewish Talmud, and yes, I'm going to say it, the Jewish Talmud, I don't recognize the Jewish Talmud as inspired like the scriptures are, but there are some historical things in the Jewish Talmud that help us get a clearer picture of things, right? So we can't just throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater. So in this blog I have called The Sabbath Resurrection, it says, I will raise him up at the last day. In this blog, I cite this source where it says in the Jewish Talmud that in first century Jerusalem, it was the Sadducees who controlled the temple, and they determined that the high priest would cut the first barley in the closing minutes. In the closing minutes, okay? Where is the Sabbath resurrection? Sabbath resurrection. I've got so many blogs that sometimes there's like about 400 and something blogs in here. Sometimes even a keyword search doesn't bring them up because there's so many blogs. There it is. There we go. Okay, so in this blog, okay, going all the way to the bottom where I know that I cite this, okay. Okay, it says first fruits offering at sundown or sunrise. Okay, it's going to make this bigger. Okay, make it a little bigger. There seems to be some question as to when the high priest was to offer the wave sheaf offering in the temple according to Leviticus 23:11. And it says, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. That's Leviticus 23:11. Yahushua HaMashiach acted as the Passover sacrifice. But when he resurrected, he was the high priest after the order of Melchizedek, who was commanded to wave the first fruits offering of souls before Yahuwah. Okay, and here's all the gospel and the New Testament scriptures where it mentions the first fruits, okay? But then keep on going. Okay, now this comes from, let's see, Manahot 10:1-4, Jacob Neusner translation, pages 753 through 754. Also, another book on page 280, it's called The Temple. It's Ministry and Services by Alfred Edersheim, and it's published in 1994. It's from pages 203 through 205. So here's what it says. As for when the high priests were to offer the wave sheaf offering, it is historically proven that it was offered at the close of the Sabbath at sundown. Though scripture specifies the day the wave sheaf was to be cut, it gives no specific time of day to cut it. Jewish history from the Second Temple period gives an interesting insight. The 2nd century Mishnah affirms that when the Sadducees controlled the temple, the sickle was put to the grain just as the sun was going down on the weekly Sabbath. That's in Manahot 10:1-4, Jacob Neusner translation, pages 753 through 54. The book called Biblical Calendars states the Bothusians, which are the temple priests, reaped the first fruits sheaf at the going out of the Sabbath. That's page 218. Additional information can be found in the section titled Temple Service, page 280, as well as in the temple, its ministry and services by Alfred Edersheim, 1994, page 203 through 205. The New Testament's silence on this Sadducean practice, along with its agreement with the ritual's fulfillment in Messiah, must be construed as acceptance of its validity. So this article goes on and says the priests began to make the first cutting right at the end of the Sabbath, continuing over into the first day of the week when the bulk of the work would be done. The ritual, however, was not complete until the sheaf was offered or waved before Elohim the following morning, or more precisely, between 9 a.m. and 12 noon. Some might object to the reaping of the sheaf in the closing minutes of the Sabbath because it is a day of rest when no work is to be done. After one understands the full reason for it, as well as Yehushua's direct statement that a priest is blameless in his performance of his required duties, that's in Matthew 12:5, any objections to the practice disappear. In other words, the priests are allowed to do work on the Sabbath day as long as it's work related to the Torah and to the furthering of the kingdom. Okay, so I had to show you this because this person who came up with this false construct of the 7-branch menorah, she eliminated first fruits as a feast and put Pentecost here and the weekly Sabbath here because she says Yahushua resurrected on the weekly Sabbath, not on first fruits, because she doesn't understand that yes, he resurrected on the Sabbath, but first fruits, the high priest cut the barley in the closing minutes of the Sabbath before it ended, and the work continued into the next day, which is the first day of the week. Okay, and then, of course, she's got trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles on this side, which is correct. But this is where she messed up. She eliminated first fruits, and instead of putting Pentecost here, she puts the weekly Sabbath. Now, I saw another incorrect model. I see more people with this one, right? They once again eliminate first fruits and say it's not a feast, even though Leviticus 23 does tell us it's a feast. They claim that Pentecost should be here and trumpets should be here, atonement, tabernacles, and they call the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles a separate feast. Okay, and I'm going to explain why that's not accurate. Okay, and their reasoning is, oh yeah, we dwell in tents for 7 days, but on the 8th day we stop dwelling in tents. Well, that's true. We do stop dwelling in tents on the 8th day, but it's still bundled together as a Feast of Tabernacles. The reason being is that the 7 days of dwelling in tents commemorates the fact that for 7,000 years from the creation, we're going to be dwelling on this earth, which is temporary. But in the 8th millennium, in other words, after Messiah completes his 1,000-year reign on earth, then the new heaven and the new earth comes down, and the new Jerusalem comes down here, and we're going to continue to tabernacle with him forever. So it doesn't matter whether the tabernacling takes place in a temporary dwelling, like a tent, or if the tabernacling continues in eternity in the New Jerusalem. The theme is still tabernacling. So it's silly to break up these two things and make them two separate feasts. And to do that, you have to eliminate the resurrection. That's very serious in my book. We can't eliminate the resurrection. Okay? So look at this. In Revelation 21, what did Yahuwah say? This is after the 1,000-year reign of Messiah on earth is finished. He says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, Yehukanan, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from Elohim out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And then he says, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of Elohim is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and Elohim himself shall be with them and be their Elohim. Now, the word dwell in this passage, he shall dwell with them, is skenu, which means a tent. Okay, so it's going to be a permanent dwelling, a permanent tent, if you will. So to separate the 7 days of Sukkot from the 8th day of Sukkot is a mistake, because both the 7-day period and the 8th day have to do with dwelling, tabernacling with him. Okay, it matters not where the tabernacling takes place, whether it's down here on earth in a temporary abode or whether it's eternal. Okay, the eternal tabernacle, skene. This word tabernacle means a tent. So we're dwelling in temporary tents for 7 days, but on the 8th day, which is the 8th millennium, right? Because what does 2 Peter 3:8 say to us? It says that with Yahuwah, 1 day is as 1,000 years. So the 8th millennium is the same as the 8th day in Yahuwah's time clock. So in the 8th millennium is when we're going to continue to tabernacle or live in a permanent tent with him. Okay, permanent tent, not a temporary one, but a permanent one. So both the 7 days of tabernacles and the 8th day, they all have to do with dwelling in a tabernacle. Okay, so it's silly, it's silly to separate these two and make these two separate feasts. They're one feast. But see, in order to do that, they eliminate the resurrection from this menorah, and that's a huge mistake. Now, this is the correct model. Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost, trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the blog because I'm going to show you some things that are going to really solidify all of this. Okay. All right, so this was in 2007. I was asking the Father, what is the testimony of Messiah in Revelation 19? And that's when he showed me the 7 feasts in Leviticus 23 are the testimony of Messiah. Well, that's when I remembered that Revelation 1:20, Messiah tells us, he says, the 7 golden candlesticks which you saw in my right hand are the 7 assemblies. Okay, so he likens these to the 7 assemblies. So then I decided to look up the meaning of these names of the 7 assemblies, and I discovered that each of their names has a meaning that is directly analogous to the 7 feasts. Okay, and you're going to be just astounded when you see this, okay? I found it fascinating that the same order in which our Messiah addressed the 7 assemblies in Revelation 1:11 is the same order in which Yahuwah listed the 7 annual feasts in Leviticus 23. Okay? So this is what he says. He says, I am Aleph and Tau. You know, in Greek, it's Alpha and Omega. He goes, I am Aleph and Tau, the first and the last. What you see, write in a book and send it unto the 7 assemblies which are in Asia. So he says Ephesus, which Ephesus is the first assembly that he mentions. That is directly analogous to the first feast in the year, which is Passover. Okay. Then he says Smyrna, which is the second assembly. That's directly analogous to the second feast that is mentioned in Leviticus 23. Then he mentioned Pergamos, and that's directly analogous to the third feast in the year, which is first fruits. Then Thyatira, that's directly analogous to the fourth feast in the year, which is Feast of Weeks. Sardis, Feast of Trumpets. Okay, that's the fifth feast in the year. Philadelphia, Feast of Tabernacles. Now, this is out of order, so just let me explain for a minute. So Philadelphia is Feast of Tabernacles, and then Laodicea is Yom Kippur. So the only feast that is out of order from the annual feasts that are mentioned in Leviticus 23 is Philadelphia, which correlates to Sukkot or Tabernacles, as this should be the last one. But Laodicea, which correlates to Yom Kippur, is the next to the last one. But in this verse, Philadelphia is the next to the last one, and Laodicea is the last one. Now, I have a hunch as to why this might be the case. I believe it is because our Messiah declared that those who endure until the end shall be saved. He said this in Matthew 24:13. Laodicea must endure to the end, just like Smyrna must also endure to the end. They have an extra 10 days of tribulation that they must endure. Now, the characteristics of Laodicea seem to be describing the inhabitants of Jerusalem in Zechariah 12 and 13, who will end up meeting their Messiah at the Mount of Olives on Yom Kippur. They're just like Smyrna, who must suffer tribulation for 10 days during what is called the 10 days of awe. Okay? Smyrna is like the foolish virgins who must go and buy the oil of our Messiah's name. Remember, Song of Solomon 1:3 tells us, your name is like oil poured forth, therefore do the virgins love you. So we understand that the oil of his name is what the wise virgins of Philadelphia have, but the foolish virgins of Smyrna do not have yet. Okay, so during those last 10 days of tribulation, Smyrna will go and buy the oil. And they're just like Rachel, who was married last to Jacob. So this is a clue as to why I believe Laodicea is listed last in Revelation 1:11. Okay. Conversely, those who qualify to elope with Messiah to heaven on the Feast of Trumpets will include all those who are washed in the blood of the Lamb just in time for the marriage supper down here on earth, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. Therefore, Philadelphia is all encompassing. In other words, when he makes both sticks, one stick in his hand, in other words, both brides, Rachel and Leah, okay, when he makes both brides one in his hand, in other words, Judah and Ephraim, when he makes them all together, all encompassing, they all become part of Philadelphia, because at that point, they will know his name. At that point, all of them will have the oil. So Philadelphia is the all-encompassing, those who are called, chosen, and faithful. They will all be counted as the bride at that point. Okay, so that's the reason why I believe that Philadelphia is mentioned here, because at the Feast of Tabernacles, all those, whether they were the foolish or whether they were the wise virgins, they'll have the oil. All of them will have the oil at that point. Okay. Now, this is why the Feast of Tabernacles, which correlates to Philadelphia, is listed last in Leviticus 23. It is because Philadelphia includes both brides who typify Leah and Rachel, both brides which typify the wise and the foolish virgins. They will become one stick in his hand just in time for the wedding feast on Sukkot. Okay? So what I've observed is a chiastic structure in the 3 spring feasts and the 3 fall feasts that are like bookends, okay, in which they mirror one another. Now, the chiastic structure of the 7 feasts. Now, what I did was I took the first and the last feast on this 7-branch menorah, okay, Passover and Tabernacles, and I connected these together, right? So, Passover and Tabernacles, what is the common denominator between these 2 feasts, right? I remember as a child seeing the Sesame Street, show where they would go, one of these things is not like the other, right? Well, what are the 2 things that are similar about Passover and Tabernacles? Both of these feasts last for a total of 8 days and represent the first and the last, the beginning and the ending. So what's similar about Passover and Tabernacles is they both last for 8 days. Okay, so you have the 14th day of Abib for Passover, which is the preparation day, and then after that you have 7 days of unleavened bread. Okay, Tabernacles is the same way. Okay, now unleavened bread and atonement. So when we connect these 2 together, unleavened bread and atonement, what is similar about these 2 feasts? Well, on Yom Kippur, we are commanded to afflict our soul, okay, which means fasting from food. Now, some people say, oh, you don't have to fast on Yom Kippur. I have a whole blog and YouTube teaching debunking that. Yes, we are commanded to fast from food. Isaiah 58 verse 3 tells us that to afflict one's soul is to fast from food, okay? So anyone telling you you don't have to fast, that's not true. Wherefore have we fasted, say they, and you see not? Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and you take no knowledge? Behold, in the day of your fast you find pleasure and exact all your labors. You fast for strife and to smite with the fist of wickedness. You shall not fast as you do this day and make your voice to be heard. He says, you shall not fast as you do this day to make your voice to be heard on high. In other words, he's talking about it's not enough to just fast outwardly and do all these wicked things. He says, is it such a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Will you call this a fast, an acceptable day? Well, there's that word acceptable, which means a jubilee, which takes place on Yom Kippur. It's Yom Kippur language that they're using here. And then he says, is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free? So he's not saying you don't fast. He's just saying if you're going to fast and still do all these wicked things, it's meaningless. Okay, so fasting from food is equal to afflicting your soul. So during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we are commanded to fast from leaven. Okay, and we are told in Deuteronomy 16:3 to eat the bread of affliction. So you see the similarity. Unleavened bread and atonement are similar in the fact that we're fasting from something. We're either giving up leaven or we're giving up food altogether. But also it has to do with affliction. We're commanded to afflict our soul here on atonement, but during unleavened bread, we're commanded to eat the bread of affliction. Okay, first fruits and trumpets. I connected these 2 feasts, first fruits and trumpets, together because Messiah resurrected, and then what? He ascended to the Father to present to the Father his first fruits of souls that he redeemed out of Abraham's bosom. Ephesians 4:8-9 tells us this. But in the future, the bride of Messiah will resurrect and ascend to heaven on the Feast of Trumpets as his first fruits of souls. So those whom our Messiah redeemed at his first coming represent the barley harvest in the spring, but those who he resurrects in the end represents the end time wheat harvest, the final wheat harvest. Okay, not the barley harvest in the spring, the final wheat harvest in the end. Okay, so first fruits and trumpets are similar in that they both represent resurrections and ascensions to heaven. Okay, so they're similar. The only feast that does not have a counterpart is the Feast of Weeks. The Feast of Weeks represents our Messiah as the light of the world. That's why he's called the Shamash. The Shamash is called the servant candle because it's the Shamash, the middle candle, that is used to light the other ones. So it's called the servant. The Shamash, and that word Shamash also means the helper. Well, our Messiah said, I will send you the Holy Spirit as your helper, as your comforter. Okay, so the name Shamash, servant, also means helper. So it makes sense that the servant candle in the middle is the Shamash, and it represents the Feast of Weeks when he poured out his spirit and baptized us with the Ruach HaKodesh and fire. Okay, so anybody who rearranges these, they're missing the prophetic shadow picture. They're messing up the prophetic shadow picture. So this is so important. Okay, now I'm going to give you a little bit more, and then we're almost done. Okay, the Passover and Tabernacles, these two feasts, as I've already said, are the first and the last of the 7 annual festivals that are listed in Leviticus 23. Both of these feasts last for a total of 8 days. Passover precedes the 7 days of unleavened bread, whereas the 8th day or the last day follows the 7 days of Sukkot or Tabernacles. Okay, unleavened bread and atonement. These two feasts involve fasting, and the theme of both of these feasts is affliction. Okay, as I've already illustrated. The Feast of Unleavened Bread requires that we fast from leaven or yeast. Deuteronomy 16:3 commands us to eat the bread of affliction. On the Day of Atonement, we are required to afflict our soul, and in Isaiah 58:3, afflicting one's soul means to fast from food. So this explains why Smyrna and Laodicea have similar characteristics pertaining to the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Day of Atonement. Okay? All right, first fruits and trumpets. The theme of both of these feasts is resurrection and ascending to heaven. On the day of first fruits, our Messiah resurrected in the closing minutes of the 7th day of the week, Sabbath. He resurrected just before the sun went down on the weekly Sabbath, when the high priest was traditionally to cut the barley and he was to wave it as a sheaf offering before Yahuwah. Okay. Ephesians 4:8 tells us that our Messiah descended first into the lower parts of the earth, which is Abraham's bosom, and then he ascended to heaven, where he brought with him all those souls before the Father as his first fruits wave sheaf offering. The next morning, the first day of the week, the people of Israel are required to bring their sheaves of barley to the temple to be waved by the high priest before Yahuwah. In the future, on the Feast of Trumpets, the bride of Messiah will be caught up to meet him in the air, and they will be taken to the heavenly huppah. Now, how do I know there's a heavenly huppah? Let's go to Psalms 19, verse 5, okay? And it says right here in Psalms 19, verse 5, it says that the sun, it says, their line has gone out through all the earth and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tabernacle for the sun, okay, and which is like a bridegroom, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. Now let's look at that chamber. Guess what that word is? Huppah. It's a wedding canopy. He's like a bridegroom coming out of his wedding huppah, rejoicing as a strong man, ready to run a race. Why? Because he just completed the 7-day honeymoon with his bride in heaven. And now he's so excited, he can't wait to come back to earth with her as his army and take vengeance on his enemies. Okay? So that's a beautiful picture there. Okay? So I cite all the sources here. The Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, like I said, does not have a counterpart because it represents our Messiah, who is called the light of the world. The shamash on the menorah is the middle candle, which is also called the servant candle because it is used to light the other 6 candles. This word shamash literally means helper or servant, which is like what the Holy Spirit is. Our Messiah said, I will send you the Holy Spirit as your helper, as your comforter. Our Messiah said he would baptize us with the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, and fire. Okay, and he said he would send the Ruach HaKodesh to help us, to teach us, to comfort us. Okay, Messiah's first coming was in the 4th millennium. As a matter of fact, when he went into the synagogue and he read the Isaiah 61 scroll, I was able to calculate that using the Jubilee cycles. And I found out that day that he did that was the year 4000. I have another blog where I charted it out from the time he was born until he began his ministry. So I have it right here. Okay, this chart. He's born on the Feast of Trumpets in 4 BC according to the Julian calendar, but 3 BC according to the Gregorian calendar. And then if you go all the way to his 30th birthday, he became eligible for priesthood when he turned 30 years old, according to Numbers 4:3 through 47. That was in 27 AD when he began his ministry. We know this because Josephus, the Jewish historian, said that 23 BC was a Jubilee year. So when we add 50 years to 23 BC, it brings us to 27. Okay, however, on the Gregorian calendar, that date changed to 28. So these two dates, the jury's still out about that. I'm thinking Messiah might return anytime between 2027 and 2028, but we'll see. Okay, but this was the year 4000. On the Jewish calendar, they eliminate the years leading up to the flood. That's why the Jewish calendar is shorter. But if we count from the creation, it was exactly the year 4000. Okay? So he came and he began his ministry in the 4th millennium, which correlates to the 4th feast on the menorah. The 4th feast being what? Feast of Weeks. Okay? Because he came as the entire purpose of his ministry was to baptize us with the Holy Spirit and fire. And this also correlates to the 4th day of creation because Yahuwah created the sun on day number 4. Okay? So, Yahuwah is called the light of the world. He's also called the Son of Righteousness in Malachi 4:2. The Hebrew word shamash, which means helper or servant, comes from the same root word for the sun, which is shamesh. So it's different vowel pointings, but it's the same letters. Sheen, mem, sheen. Sheen, mem, sheen. Okay, it's the same letters. Before the vowels were added, these two words were identical. Okay, so the servant candle in the middle, shamash, also means the sun. The sun is a gigantic ball of fire, and he came and baptized us with the Holy Spirit and fire. So, yeah, it makes sense that the Feast of Weeks is in the middle. So those rearranging these candles are missing the prophetic picture. They're missing the prophetic picture. Okay. Also, Shabuot acts as a connector between the 3 spring feasts and the 3 fall feasts. Even though our Messiah had already ascended 10 days earlier in Acts 1:11, he ascended before the Feast of Weeks. That was the last feast he fulfilled at his first coming. He told his disciples to go and wait in Jerusalem for 10 days. And he said, after 10 days, I will pour out my spirit. And he said, and you shall receive power. Said it right here in Acts chapter 1. He says, but you shall receive power after the Ruach HaKodesh has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses unto me, both in Jerusalem and in all of Judea and in Samaria and unto the uttermost part of the earth. So the fact that this is the middle branch on the menorah tells us that this was his entire purpose for coming, is to empower us to preach the good news to the world. Okay, so we can't do away with this feast and move it over somewhere else. We can't do away with first fruits. So I want to share somebody tried to postulate to me this week saying that the reason they said that we don't include first fruits is because when it mentions first fruits here in the King James Bible, it doesn't say anything about it being a feast. I mean, the King James English translators just put the word feast of first fruits. But in these verses between Leviticus 23:9 and 23:14, it doesn't say that it's a feast. And also they say it doesn't say that it's a holy convocation. But let me show you why they're wrong. This person who said this to me is wrong. Because first thing he says that the weekly Sabbath is a holy convocation. You shall do no work therein. Okay. But then he says, over here, he says, these are the feasts of Yahuwah. Okay. In Leviticus 23:4, he uses this as a blanket statement to blanket all the feasts that he is about to list in this chapter. He says, these are the feasts of Yahuwah, even holy convocations, which you shall proclaim in their seasons. Now, the word feast is moed, like I said. It's an appointment. It's a fixed time or a season. It's a festival, okay? But the word convocation, mikra, means something called out, a public meeting, okay? A rehearsal. Now, someone said to me, well, we're not commanded to assemble on the Feast of First Fruits. That's not true. Let's look at this. And Yahuwah spoke unto Moshe, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when you be come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest. So that means everybody in the land was commanded to assemble at the temple to bring their sheaf to the priest. To say that this was not a holy convocation, that we're not commanded to assemble, that's just not true, okay? And even though it never says this is a feast, this verse right here tells us all the feasts I'm going to list here in this chapter, These are my feasts. So if first fruits was not a feast, he would have left this out entirely. He would have not even bothered to mention it.
These are all my feasts, but the one I stick in the middle of all the feasts that I'm listing, that's not a feast.
Yeah. I'm like,
Makes
how
no
can
sense.
anybody say it's not a feast? He already told us at the beginning, these are the feasts of Yahuwah. So he already qualified this first fruits as a feast and, yes, a holy convocation. Yes, because we're commanded to assemble and bring our sheaf, okay, to the priest. So to say it wasn't a feast or a holy convocation is a mistake. And then you've got the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles, which this same person was trying to tell me that this, the last day, the 8th day, okay, is a separate feast from the rest of the 7 days. But the reason why this is not true is because, as I've already pointed out, the 7th day, the 7 days of the feast represent this temporary tabernacle that we're now living in, which is the earth. But the 8th day of the feast is when the new heaven and the new earth comes down, the new Jerusalem, and we're going to continue to tabernacle with him forever. And we already see this, as I've already pointed out, in Revelation 21. It says right here, the tabernacle of Elohim is with men, and he will dwell with them. So that means we're going to tabernacle with him forever in this new tabernacle that comes down out of heaven. So it matters not whether it's the temporary tabernacle we call this earth that we're now living in, or the future tabernacle that's the new heaven and the new earth. Either way, it's tabernacling. The theme is the same. So we can't separate those two feasts and treat them as two separate feasts. But this is, people are coming up with their own construct. And this model, these two models here are wrong. This is the correct model. Okay? This is the correct model. And see why this is important? Because Yahushua HaMashiach fulfilled all of them. He died on Passover. He was buried on the Feast of Unleavened Bread. He resurrected on first fruits and brought those souls from Abraham's bosom, presented them to the Father as his first fruits wave sheaf offering. Okay, 50 days later, he poured out his Ruach HaKodesh and immersed us with fire like he promised. He was born here on the Feast of Trumpets at the tail end of Tishri 1, just as the sun was going down, and it became Tishri 2. Therefore, the circumcision count began on the 2nd day of Tishri. Even though he was born on the 1st day of Tishri, we count the 8 days to a circumcision on Tishri 2. He was circumcised as an infant here. His blood was sprinkled as a foreshadowing of the one who was going to sprinkle many nations with his blood. Okay. And then what? He tabernacled among us. He dwelt among us. He was the Word that became flesh and dwelt and tabernacled among humanity. As a 2-week-old infant, he dwelled in a tent with his parents to illustrate that he was Emmanuel, Elohim with us, Elohim tabernacling among us. Okay, so.
And if I can just elaborate on that, if you go back to the picture.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you want me to go back to this one? Yeah.
So just as initially all 7 were foreshadows, now he's completed the first 4, and he completed the last 3 in a sense, in part. But as things move on, there will be a greater fulfillment of trumpets, a greater fulfillment of atonement, an additional or a greater fulfillment of tabernacling.
Right.
Because there's going to be the whole millennium. So this is the whole return in the millennium is those last 3.
And beyond the millennium.
And then, of course, at the end of Tabernacles, we have the last great day, which is the 8th day, which that's the tabernacling that occurs not on this earth, right? The new kingdom. So that's where that 8th day is sort of unique, but at the same time, it's still tabernacling.
Right. Yeah, so if you see people displaying these incorrect models of the feasts and the 7-branch menorah, I just want you to remember this is the correct model. And I'm not saying it's like a salvation issue or something like that, but
not at all. Yeah.
But it messes up the prophetic shadow picture. And it's important that we get these shadow pictures correct so that we can have a clearer picture of who Messiah is, that he's the spirit of prophecy. Okay, now this blog is much longer than the pieces that I went through, but I wanted to at least go, I know this is taking longer than I've originally expected, but I want to go through this list so you see the names, the meanings of the names of these assemblies and how they correlate, okay? So, Ephesus, look at what this means. It means to let go. It means permitted. Okay, now why does this correlate to Passover? Because it was on Passover that Pharaoh finally said, let Israel go. Okay, also in exchange for our Messiah's death sentence, the gospel account says that Pontius Pilate said, let Barabbas go. See, Bar-Abba is an Aramaic name, which means son of the father. But the Greek spelling is Barabbas, but it's really Bar-Abba, meaning son of the father. So Barabbas was a prophetic picture of the whole nation of Israel. Because what did Yahuwah say to Pharaoh? He said, Israel is my firstborn son. He said, Israel, the whole nation, is my son. Now we got Barabbas, who's the firstborn son. He's like a twin goat of the twin goats of Yom Kippur. He's like the twin that gets sent away, while the other twin goat, which is Yahushua, he's the one that gets killed in his place. Because what does the word scapegoat mean? It means the innocent party who takes the place of the guilty party. So Yahushua was the innocent party who took the place of Barabbas, who was the guilty party, and Barabbas represented the whole nation of Israel, the firstborn son. So the point being is that Ephesus, the meaning of the name to let go, perfectly aligns with Passover. Okay? And so then in Revelation 2:7, Yahushua addressed Ephesus, and listen to what he says. He says, he that has an ear, let him hear what the Ruach, or the Spirit, says unto the assemblies. To him that overcomes will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of Elohim. Now there's two key words that I highlighted here, the tree of life and paradise. These words hint about his death on the tree, which was to give us eternal life, the tree of life. He also mentioned paradise, which is another hint because it reminds us of him telling the thief who was next to him on the cross, today shall you be with me in paradise. That's in Luke 23:43. Now, as a side note, I've seen people say that he wasn't telling him that he would be with him in paradise that same day. They say, oh, you put a comma after the word today, and it's basically saying, today, I'm telling you today, you shall be with me in paradise. Well, that doesn't make sense because I don't need to say to my husband, I'm telling you today that I'm making you a sandwich. Like, why do I need to tell you? I'm telling you today I'm making you a sandwich. You already know it's today. There's no need to mention, hey, it's today and I'm making you a sandwich. It just doesn't make.
You're not presently talking to me tomorrow.
Yeah. So why would anybody say, I'm telling you today, but you're going to be with me in paradise someday, one day. I don't know when, but I'm telling you this today. Well, we already know it's today. Why do you have to say it's today when we already know it's today? It just doesn't make sense. Okay. So yes, the same day Because why? Yahushua went into the lower parts of the earth and did what? Gave gifts unto men. And so, of course, if he gave the people that were in Abraham's bosom gifts, presented them to the Father as his first fruits wave sheaf offering, why would he also not include this guy who humbled himself and repented? Okay, so it was on the same day. Don't let anybody tell you differently. It was on that same day. He ascended. It tells us right here in Ephesians. Okay, let me show it to you. Ephesians 4. Okay, it says, wherefore he says, he ascended up on high. When he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. Okay, in other words, those that were in slavery in Egypt, captivity, those that were in slavery to sin, he led captivity captive. In other words, he took captive those who kept us in captivity, the demonic principalities. Now that he ascended, what is it but that he also descended first into the lower parts of the earth? Where is the lower parts of the earth? Luke 16 tells us Abraham's bosom. He that descended is the same also that ascended far above all heavens. That's the third heaven. Remember, Paul the apostle said in 1 Corinthians, I know a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know, but such a one was caught up to paradise, which is the third heaven. So Paul identified paradise as the third heaven. So Yahushua ascended far above all heavens. In other words, above the first heaven, which is our atmosphere between earth and, where the airplanes and the birds fly. The second heaven would be what we would today call the, outer space or whatever. I know that flat earthers don't agree. I don't care. The second heaven is where the stars and the planets live. The expanse is called the firmament. It's a huge expanse. And the far above all heavens, meaning the third heaven, that he might fill all things. So that's what he did. The same day he did that, he brought this thief with him on the cross. Okay, now look at what he says to Ephesus in Revelation 2:2. He says, I know your works and your labor. Think about labor. What were the slaves in Egypt doing? The Egyptians held them captive as slaves and forced them to do hard labor. So he's saying this to Ephesus, I know your works and your labor and your patience and how you cannot bear them which are evil. You have tried them which say they are apostles and are not, and have found them liars. Who was tried and found to be a liar in Egypt? It was Pharaoh. Pharaoh was given 10 plagues to try him, and he showed himself to be a liar. He did not keep his word. Okay? Revelation 2:3. And have borne and have patience, and for my name's sake have labored and have not fainted. So he's telling Ephesus that they have labored and have not fainted. Well, guess what? In Egypt, Israel cried out to Yahuwah to deliver them from the oppression and hard labor, and he heard them, just as our Messiah answered concerning Ephesus. Okay, Deuteronomy 26:7 says, and when we cried unto Yahuwah Elohim our fathers, Yahuwah heard our voice and looked on our affliction and our labor and our oppression. Okay, so this is how we know that Ephesus correlates to Passover, because we see the little hints, okay? Smyrna. What does the meaning of Smyrna mean? Strengthened for myrrh or bitter. This correlates to the Feast of Unleavened Bread because myrrh was used in ancient times to embalm dead bodies. Numbers 33:3 tells us that Israel left Egypt while the Egyptians were burying their dead, and this was on the 15th day of Abib, which was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is when our Messiah's body was also being prepared with spices. In other words, aloes and myrrh. That's what they used. When you see the word spices in the King James Version, it's talking about these essential oils, okay? Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea buried him in the tomb, okay? Also, the Passover meal included bitter herbs to remind Israel of the bitterness of slavery that they were being delivered from the night that they left Egypt. Okay, and I cite the references, the scripture references here. Additionally, in Revelation 2:8 through 11, Yahushua addressed Smyrna in the following way. He used the theme of death 3 times. In verse 8, he says, "These things says the first and the last, which was dead and is alive." Okay? And then he says, "Be you faithful unto death, and you shall receive the crown of life." Verse 10, "He that overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death." That's verse 11. So in this way, we can see that Smyrna represents the Feast of Unleavened Bread, okay? Because it has to do with myrrh, bitterness, okay? It has to do with death, okay? So this correlates to first fruits, Pergamos. Pergamos means height, elevation, okay? Why does this correlate to first fruits? Because our Messiah resurrected at the end of the Sabbath, what we would today call Saturday evening or at sundown. As I've already said, in first century Jerusalem, the high priest would cut the first fruits of the barley during the closing minutes of Shabbat, but the remainder of the sheaves were brought to the temple the next day for the priest to wave before Yahuwah. Ephesians 8 through 9, 4:8 through 9 explains that our Messiah first descended into the lower parts of the earth, which is Abraham's bosom, and he gave gifts unto men. After this, he ascended to the Father in heaven and waved those souls as his first fruits wave sheaf offering. Okay? So, if Pergamos means height or elevation, do you see the connection? He ascended up on high. That's height. Okay? He ascended far above all heavens. That's height. That's elevation. Okay? In Revelation 2:13 through 14, our Messiah addressed Pergamos with 2 examples. He said that, here's 2 examples of those who tried to ascend above the heights. The devil, thinking that he was going to ascend above the heights. Okay? Because Satan thought he was going to ascend above the heights. Look at what he says in Isaiah 14:14 through 15. See, it was the fallen angel Halel, who is called Lucifer in Latin, who is also Satan. He presumptuously made the declaration, "I shall ascend above the heights of the heavens." But instead, Yahuwah tells him that he will be brought low. He will be brought down to the pit of Sheol. And then who else said he was going to ascend above the heights? There was Balaam, who was enticed by Balak to ascend to the high places of Baal. In Numbers 22:41, it says that Balak took Balaam, brought him up into the high places of Baal, okay, that he might see the uttermost part of the people, because he was going to place a curse on Israel. So now let's look at Revelation 2:13. He's addressing Pergamos, and he says, "I know your works and where you dwell, even where Satan's seat is. And you hold fast my name and have not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwells." So Satan thought he was going to ascend above the heights of the heavens, but he wasn't. He's been brought down. Our Messiah's the one who ascended above the heights. He's the one that took all those first fruits to heaven and wave them as his first fruits. So you see that? That's why Pergamos correlates to first fruits. Okay? Also, in these passages, 1 Corinthians 15, 20 through 23, James 1:18, and Revelation 14:4, we see themes that the height or the elevation is related to our Messiah ascending to the Father in heaven. And in the process, he defeated Satan, who has been cast down from his high places. So it is Yahushua who ascended to the heights of the heavens, and he has casted down Satan where Satan's seat dwells, or at one time he did dwell as a covering cherub. It says in Ezekiel 28 that Satan was the prince of Tyre, that he at one time was the covering cherub, okay? But now he's been cast down, okay? Thyatira means burning incense or odor of affliction. The name of this assembly correlates to the Feast of Weeks, Shabuot, when Yahushua baptized his followers with the Ruach HaKodesh and fire. So it was the persecution, right after Yahushua died. The disciples were hiding because they thought, we're next. He's killed. He's been killed. We're his disciples. They're going to come after us. So they were hiding. So it was the persecution and the affliction of the disciples that caused them to pray for the outpouring of the Ruach HaKodesh. Their prayers ascended to heaven like incense, and Yahuwah responded to them with cloven tongues of fire. So in keeping with the theme of fire and burning, Yahushua addressed Thyatira in the following manner. Listen to what he said. These things says the Son of Elohim, who has his eyes like unto a flame of fire, and his feet are like fine brass. So he didn't say anything about fire when he's addressing the other assemblies. But when he's addressing Thyatira, he mentions fire. His eyes were like a flame of fire. In Revelation 2:26, Yahushua tells Thyatira that they shall rule over the nations if they overcome. This is the same promise that he gave his disciples in the first chapter of Acts. He told them that they would be witnesses unto the uttermost parts of the earth. Okay, so in Revelation 2:26, he says to Thyatira, I will give you power over the nations if you overcome. Okay? And he that overcomes and keeps my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations. And this is what Yahushua said would happen on the day of Shabuot, Pentecost. Acts 1:8, but you shall receive power after the Ruach HaKodesh, Holy Spirit, has come upon you. And you shall be witnesses unto me, both in Jerusalem and in all of Judea and in Samaria and unto the uttermost part of the earth. And here's some other scripture citations you should look at. Okay, Sardis. Sardis is the fifth assembly, and it's the fifth branch on the menorah. Okay, it means red ones or escaping. Okay, this correlates to the Feast of Trumpets because this is when the bride will escape the wrath of Elohim and be whisked off to heaven. Okay, so Messiah Yahushua will catch away his bride to heaven. This is after the Great Tribulation of 1,260 days. We don't believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. It's a post-tribulation harpazo. So Sardis literally means escaping. The two witnesses in Revelation 11:6 are said to have fire proceeding from their mouths to devour their enemies. This correlates to the meaning of red ones because they are on fire with the power of the Ruach HaKodesh, Holy Spirit, to do signs and wonders. And after these corporate two witnesses are killed by the beast, They are resurrected to heaven as the bride. They will be taken to the heavenly huppah, where they will put on immortality, and they will be married to the bridegroom. Thus they will escape the wrath of Elohim. We are told in 1 Thessalonians 5, 3 through 9, listen to what Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 5. He says, for when they shall say peace and safety. Well, that started in January of 2020 when Jared Kushner and President Trump presented the peace to prosperity deal to Israel. They presented a peace agreement, but the Palestinians rejected it. This was on the 29th of January. The very next day, sudden destruction came upon the whole world when the scamdemic began. Okay, it says, for when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. So the name of that peace agreement that they presented was called the Peace to Prosperity Deal. Okay, look at the word safety means. It means security, peace and security. Okay, peace means prosperity. Okay, this word for peace is the Greek word Irene. Okay, like that song, Come On Irene, So Irene, it means prosperity. Safety means security. Okay, like Angela Johnson, security, security. Okay, so peace and safety. They presented, the name of that agreement was called the Peace to Prosperity Deal. Okay, and guess what? Sudden destruction came the next day. The whole world went on lockdown. Okay. And then he says, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. You are all children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness. He says, therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation. For Elohim has not appointed us to wrath, but to obtain salvation by our Yahushua HaMashiach. So in other words, on the Feast of Trumpets, we shall escape the wrath. That's why Thyatira is the fifth feast. Or I'm sorry, not Thyatira. Where am I at? Am I on Thyatira? Sardis. That's right, Sardis. Sardis is the fifth assembly that he mentioned in Revelation 1:11. It's also the fifth feast in Leviticus 23. Sardis correlates to the Feast of Trumpets, and it means escaping. So here's the following passages that I would recommend that you visit to validate what I'm saying here. So the same way that our Messiah addressed Sardis is indicative of the seventh Hebrew month of Atanim or Tishri. You'll notice that he addresses himself as the one who has the seven spirits of Elohim and the seven stars. In Revelation 3:1, he does not describe himself in this manner with the other assemblies. So in Revelation 3:3, he tells Sardis that if they do not repent and if they are not watching, that he will come upon them as a thief in the night. So he uses the same phrase, thief in the night. This is a hint that he's coming to snatch away his bride to the 7-day honeymoon in secret. Why? Because he comes for the virgins in the middle of the night at midnight. We're told in Matthew 25 that the wise virgins go into the marriage at midnight. This is when everybody else is asleep. Okay? In fact, 1 Corinthians 15:51, Paul, Shaul, calls it a mystery. He says, behold, I show you a mystery. Well, that Greek word for mystery, mysterion, means a secret. So people that say, oh, there's no such thing as a secret rapture. Yes, there is. It's just after the tribulation, not before the tribulation. So the Christian church is wrong when they say that it's a pre-tribulation rapture, but they're not wrong when they say it's a secret, because it is a secret. Yahushua gathers his bride first to the wedding honeymoon in heaven. And I have a blog about that called The Secret Elopement on the day that no man knows. So yes, he's going to take his bride to Shamayim, to heaven, okay, first. And then we come back with him as his army. And that's when he lands his feet on the Mount of Olives, and every eye shall see him on Yom Kippur, 10 days later. Okay. Interestingly, the Feast of Trumpets is called the day that no man knows, because it is the only feast that requires the new moon watchers to watch for that first sliver of the new moon before the feast can begin. Now, you'll notice he uses the word watch and watchful with Sardis, okay, but not with the other assemblies. At Revelation 3:2, be watchful and strengthen the things which remain that are ready to die, for I have not found your works perfect before Elohim. Revelation 3:3, remember therefore how you have received and heard, and hold fast and repent. If therefore you shall not watch, I will come on you as a thief. Okay, and you shall not know what hour I will come upon you. So, watching for the new moon for the Feast of Trumpets is key. We are commanded to watch narrowly for the new moon, especially on the Feast of Trumpets. It can't begin until we spot the new moon. Okay? Our Messiah warned us in Revelation 16:15 to watch and to keep our wedding garments. Listen to what he says in Revelation 16:15. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. So in Revelation 3:4-5, when he's addressing Sardis, he tells them to keep their wedding garments undefiled, because the Feast of Trumpets is when he will elope to his Father's house with his bride, and she must be ready. Okay, now to understand more about who the thief in the night is, I have this other blog called Times, Seasons, and the Thief in the Night. When is the real New Year? So I recommend that one. Now, we're almost finished. Laodicea means judgment, justice, vengeance, or punishment of the people. So this correlates to Yom Kippur. See, Yom Kippur is associated with the day of vengeance, when Yahushua will come back and take vengeance on all those who persecuted his bride. Okay? He will return to earth at the Mount of Olives with his bride. This is 10 days after the Feast of Trumpets. This will be on the day of vengeance. Yom Kippur is associated with justice, justice for the people, but vengeance and wrath to those who are the enemies of Israel. Okay, and then I give these scripture citations that you should look at later. Okay, Yahushua addressed Laodicea, commanding them to buy gold that is tried in the fire, and a white wedding garment. This is the same thing that Moses commanded Israel when they were preparing to take their wedding vows on Mount Sinai in Exodus 19. Okay, now what he says to Laodicea in Revelation 3:18 is loaded with prophetic meaning. He says, I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire, that you may be rich, and white raiment, that you may be clothed, and that the shame of your nakedness does not appear, and anoint your eyes with eye salve, that you may see. Now, why does he say this to Laodicea? Well, the command to buy gold tried in the fire and eye salve that they may see, I believe, is being addressed to those who are the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the Yahudim, the Jews who are living in Jerusalem at that time. They didn't accept him in time to elope with the bridegroom on the Feast of Trumpets. However, during those final 10 days between trumpets and atonement, they will finally be ready to see him and accept him. Okay, so the prophet Zechariah told us, and I already read this to you earlier, Zechariah 13:8, it says, "And it shall come to pass in all the land, says Yahuwah, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein." In verse 9, "And I will bring the third part through the fire and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. And they shall call on my name." Now they're finally going to know his name. "And I will hear them, and I will say, it is my people. They shall say, Yahuwah is my Elohim." So you see the common denominator. Right here, he tells Laodicea, "Buy of me gold tried in the fire." Down here, he says he's going to bring them through the fire and refine them as silver and gold. So Laodicea, I believe, is describing those who don't know Yahushua yet, but during those 10 days of awe, they're going to know him. Okay, so when Messiah returns to the Mount of Olives on Yom Kippur, the inhabitants of Jerusalem who were previously blinded to him as the Messiah will have their eyes opened. That's why he says to put eye salve on your eyes. Anoint your eyes with eye salve that you may see. Okay? So I love this painting that this artist did. It's showing Yahushua standing on the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem's on fire in the background. And you see all these Yahudim, Jews, gathered to look upon the one whom they've pierced. Okay? So the other thing is that Yom Kippur has been nicknamed face to face. In other words, the Yahudim, the Jewish people, call it face to face. The priests in the temple would once per year enter the Holy of Holies, and the high priest would come face to face with Yahuwah. And it was imperative that he had to be cleansed and washed, because if he wasn't, then he could die there on the spot. But this phrase, face to face, also applies to the future wedding day for the kingdom of Judah. The ones who missed the harpazo on the Feast of Trumpets, but they will be standing there at the Mount of Olives, ready to look upon the one whom they've pierced. Okay, the veil will be removed from their eyes. They will finally look at him face to face. Okay, the veil will be removed. Okay, now Philadelphia means brotherly love, kindness, and affection. We're almost finished here. This feast is associated with the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, because Messiah will have already returned back to earth on Yom Kippur 5 days earlier with his bride, and they will celebrate the marriage supper of the Lamb, but that's going to take place down here on earth, and all the nations will be invited as guests. And we read about that in Matthew 22, 1 through 14. On Yom Kippur, our Messiah will make the 2 houses of Israel, the 2 sticks, as only 1 stick in his hand. And we shall no longer be divided by sibling rivalry. Remember, Rachel and Leah were 2 sisters, and they were at odds with each other. There was enmity. There was sibling rivalry. But what happens? Philadelphia means brotherly love. We're no longer going to be at odds with each other. The kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Ephraim shall be one stick in his hand. We're going to have brotherly love and affection for one another. Okay, that's why Philadelphia represents the Feast of Tabernacles, because we're all going to be together at the same feast. See, ever since King Solomon died in 1 Kings chapter 12, the two kingdoms of Judah and Israel have been divided into two houses. There has been hatred, division, and rivalry between these two once united families. You see, in the days of King David, all 12 tribes were united under King David. But the Apostle Paul even described this as enmity, which means division. And he talked about that in Ephesians 2:15. It means, enmity means hatred, hostility. So the hatred, the rivalry between Judah and Joseph will finally be healed just in time for the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay. And, I already read to you Matthew 22 about how the wedding feast is going to be offered to those from the kingdom of Judah, but many of them will not come to the wedding feast. Okay, but he's going to send out the invitations to the nations, and many of them will come, and they shall be guests at the wedding. So now we understand what he means when he says the testimony of Yahushua is the spirit of prophecy. Okay, and when people want to tell you, oh, we don't have to keep the feasts anymore because now we're into the renewed covenant. If they, you talk to Christians and you say that, they say that to you, it's like, well, then I guess you don't have the testimony of Jesus then. I'll say that to Christians that try to tell me we don't have to keep the feast. I says, well, then I guess you don't have the testimony of Jesus. They're like, what? What do you mean? I'm like, don't you know the 7 feasts are his testimony? And then I list them one by one. I said he died on Passover. He was buried on unleavened bread. He resurrected on first fruits. He poured out his spirit on Pentecost. He was born on trumpets, circumcised on atonement. And he dwelled among us as Emmanuel on the Feast of Tabernacles. There you go. So I guess since we don't have to do them anymore, I guess you don't really have his testimony then. So that's the end of this teaching. And I'm sorry it took longer than I had originally intended, but it was something I couldn't avoid. Just too much meat to chew on.
Do you have a study, a blog that you could show about the whole Ashkenazi thing and how that's a bunch of crap and kind of the whole Torah for the Tribes, Matthew Nolan issue?
Yeah. Okay, so in my blog called The Parable of the Fig Tree.
So a brother says, the scripture says, the Lord set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of the people which shall be left from Assyria, from Egypt, and from Parthos, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar. In other words, they believe that the remnant of Israel are only coming from those locations. Therefore, the Ashkenaz are not legit.
It tells us in scripture that they're coming from the uttermost parts of the earth, from the 4 corners, which is the 4 directions, right? So in this blog, and it's quite lengthy, I don't have time to get into it. So debunking common myths. Is it true that modern day Israelites trace their ancestry to Japhet and not Shem in the Bible? There are recent anti-Jewish arguments going around that conflate multiple facts, discredited hypotheses, and conspiracy theories to imply that all modern-day Jews are somehow imposters trying to steal the land of Israel from their rightful owners. So let's look at these claims. True, the majority of Yehudim today are Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews make up between 75%, 85% of the world's Jewish population, according to various estimates. True, Ashkenaz is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as a descendant of Japhet. Genesis 3:2-3 lists Ashkenaz as a grandson of Japhet.
That's really inconvenient of you to say that.
Why?
The joke.
Okay. False. Therefore, the majority of Jews descend from Japhet. Okay. In the Jewish world, Ashkenaz as a place named started to refer to parts of modern-day Germany. Ashkenazi Jews are simply Jews who lived in that area, later migrating into Eastern Europe as well. They do not descend from biblical Ashkenaz in any way. They are called that because that's where they were sent into exile. It doesn't mean that's where they were descended from. Okay? Most Ashkenazi Jews spoke Yiddish and not Hebrew, and some still do to this day. Yiddish started as an amalgamation of languages surrounding Ashkenazi Jews, mostly German, but also elements of Hebrew and Russian. It was spoken by most Ashkenazi Jews as their first language, with Hebrew being reserved for ritual practices only. Okay, false. Therefore, they do not descend from ancient Israelites. Okay, people adopt languages of their surroundings all the time. And if their community persists, their dialect of that language becomes a language in its own right. See, it's nothing different than when in Messiah's day, the Jews that returned back to Jerusalem, like Ezra and, Zerubbabel, they picked up the Babylonian language and they incorporated some of the Babylonian language into the Jewish language. And that's how Aramaic started. Okay. So that doesn't prove that they're not the legit children of Israel. So there's nothing special about Ashkenazi Jews speaking Yiddish. It would be like African Americans speaking English and saying that proves they're not African Americans. Okay, that's silly. That's a silly argument. Okay, false. Yiddish is a Turkish language, not a Germanic one. If you take even a cursory look at Yiddish, you will see that much of the grammar and vocabulary comes directly from German. As I mentioned above, it was influenced by Hebrew and Russian as well. None of these are Turkish languages. Theory. Khazars are descendants of Japhet. Khazars were a Turkish people who established a major commercial empire starting in the 6th century. According to some Muslim traditions, Turks descend from Japhet. Theory. Khazars converted to Judaism en masse. According to tradition, Khazars all converted to Judaism in the 8th or 9th centuries. In reality, while some conversions certainly took place, the extent of this conversion is uncertain. False. This makes Khazars fake Jews. Jews are an ethno-religious group. One can become a Jew through birth or by converting. Okay. Now we know this because in, Ezekiel, okay, chapter 44 or 47, it tells us, and it shall come to pass that you shall divide the land by lot for an inheritance, and to the stranger that sojourns among you, which shall beget children among you, and they shall be unto you as one born in the country among the children of Israel. They shall have an inheritance with you among the tribes of Israel. And it shall come to pass that in what tribe the stranger sojourns, there shall you give him his inheritance, says Yahuwah Elohim. So it doesn't matter if people in the European nations converted and said, hey, I want to start keeping Passover with you guys. Hey, I want to start keeping Shabbat with you guys. I want to sojourn with you guys. Yahuwah still counted them as Israel, regardless if they became that way through conversion or if they were born into the DNA bloodline of the kingdom of Judah. Okay, so converts are no less Jewish than those who were born into a Jewish family. Discredited. Ashkenazi Jews are descendants of the Khazars and not real Jews. This is a theory on the origin of Ashkenazi Jews that was developed in the 19th century. As explained above, converts to Judaism. Now, I realize Judaism has all this extra biblical stuff in it from the Talmud, which we do not agree with. But nevertheless, there's enough Torah observance there, enough of it, that Yahuwah still is working with them, right? He's still working with them because he sees that they're doing their best. They're trying to obey Torah, even though they've got a lot of mixture, which isn't good. I'm not saying that the Talmud is good. I'm just saying there's enough there, okay?
And they're binding themselves to the Elohim of Israel.
Right. So, as explained above, converts to Judaism are real Jews in any case, but DNA tests reveal that Ashkenazi Jews have much in common with other Jews and other Middle Eastern people, nothing in common with Khazars. Conclusion: Shem and Japhet are biblical figures. There is no scientific evidence of the existence of either of them. So any claims of their descendants cannot be proven nor disproven scientifically. However, the vast majority of Jews are Middle Eastern people, often associated with Shem, not related to the Europeans, often identified with Japhet. They have lived among the nations for many years. Okay? So it's ridiculous to make these claims because even in the days of Egypt, many Egyptians left with them as a mixed multitude. So you're going to say that the mixed multitude weren't true Israelites? No. He basically said that those who sojourn with you are counted as one born into the country. Okay? So it doesn't matter about DNA. It's not about DNA. It never was about DNA. It's about faith. Abraham was a Chaldean. You're going to disqualify Abraham because he wasn't born an Israelite? He wasn't from the seed of Jacob? Okay, so it's a goofy argument.
Okay. In this chat, you'll look up a little bit. You'll see I listed a video called The 10 Lost Tribes of Israel. Are they really lost? And the YouTube channel Expedition Bible, this archaeologist who's a evangelical believer as well, lists sort of where the 10 tribes dispersed to initially. Of course, they continued to spread as populations spread around the world, but they're not really lost in the way that we think. Shabbat Shalom.
Yes, Shavua Tov. Everybody have a good week, and thank you for joining us.
Yahuwah bless you and keep you. Yahuwah make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yahuwah lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. We hope you've enjoyed today's broadcast and that you are encouraged in your walk with Messiah. For more teachings, subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified of our latest content. Visit Maria's many blogs at doubleportioninheritance.com. That's doubleportioninheritance.com. This ministry is made possible by the prayers and support of listeners like you. To make a donation by PayPal or Venmo.com, use the email address doubleportioninheritance@gmail.com. That's doubleportioninheritance@gmail.com. On behalf of Maria and Gary at Double Portion Inheritance Ministries, may Yahuwah bless you.